When you think of the Middle Ages, who comes to mind? Kings, knights, maybe a pope or two. But here's the twist. Some of the most powerful rulers of medieval Europe weren't men at all. Hidden behind dusty chronicles are queens who commanded armies, ran kingdoms, and even outsmarted emperors. Yet, history class rarely mentions their names. Today, we'll pull back the curtain on these forgotten queens. Fierce, brilliant, and sometimes terrifying women who shaped medieval Europe in ways their male counterparts never imagined. Let's start with Empress Matilda of England. Picture this. It's the 12th century, and England is on the edge of civil war. Matilda, daughter of King Henry I, was supposed to inherit the throne, but her cousin Stephen snatched the crown instead. Did Matilda give up? Not a chance. She raised armies, crossed treacherous rivers in the dead of night, and even escaped a siege by disguising herself in white and slipping across the snow. The fight became known as the Anarchy, and she almost won. Matilda never wore the English crown herself, but here's the kicker. Her son did. You might have heard of him, King Henry II, the guy who started the Plantagenet dynasty. So while Stephen got his moment, it was Matilda's bloodline that truly ruled England for centuries. Think about it. One woman's determination changed the royal family tree forever. But England wasn't the only stage for powerful queens. In another corner of Europe, a young Norwegian widow would rise to the throne. Meet Queen Ulfhild of Norway and Sweden, a woman whose story sounds like a medieval soap opera. Originally married to King Inge, the elder of Sweden, she later wed two more kings, first the King of Denmark, then the King of Sweden again. Ulfhild wasn't just a pawn in royal marriages. She used her position to broker alliances, strengthen borders, and secure her family's power. Chroniclers say she was clever, calculating, and knew how to play the dangerous game of medieval politics better than most men. But Ulfhild's life was anything but peaceful. Rivals accused her of poisoning King Inge's brothers, sparking one of the bloodiest succession struggles in Swedish history. Was she guilty, or just the victim of slander? The sources are murky, and maybe that's exactly how she wanted it. The truth may be lost, but one thing's certain. She left behind a reputation that terrified her enemies and fascinated historians. And she's only one example. Wait until you meet the queen who nearly destroyed the French crown. Now, let's head to France and meet Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most famous and influential women of the Middle Ages. She wasn't just a queen once, she was queen twice. First of France, then of England. Eleanor married Louis VII of France, but their marriage soured during a crusade. She divorced him, which was nearly unheard of in the 12th century, and then stunned Europe by marrying Henry Plantagenet, who soon became King Henry II of England. Talk about an upgrade. But Eleanor wasn't just sitting on the throne, sipping wine. She joined the Second Crusade, riding thousands of miles across Europe and the Holy Land. Chroniclers describe her leading her ladies dressed as Amazons, armour and all. Imagine the shock of medieval soldiers seeing a queen ride into battle. Of course, not everyone approved. Some accused her of bringing scandal and chaos to the crusade. But whether they loved her or hated her, nobody could ignore her. Her influence didn't stop with crusades or marriages. Eleanor was the mother of Richard the Lionheart and King John. Yes, the same King John from the Robin Hood stories. She advised her sons, plotted rebellions against her husband, and even got locked up in a castle for years because of her political schemes. Yet, when Henry died, she walked free and became Queen Mother, shaping English politics into her 80 seconds. That's a lifetime of power in an era when women weren't supposed to rule at all. Eleanor's story proves queens could outlast and outsmart kings, but wait until you meet Isabella of France, sometimes called the She-Wolf of France. Married to England's king, Edward II, Isabella faced betrayal, neglect, and a kingdom in chaos. Instead of suffering quietly, she launched a full-scale invasion of England with her lover and deposed her own husband. It's a tale of passion, politics, and brutal revenge, and it shook the English monarchy to its core. Isabella was no ordinary queen consort. She built alliances with France, gathered an army in the Low Countries, and struck when England was weakest. In 1326, she landed on English soil, cheered by rebellious nobles. Edward II fled, his power crumbled, and Isabella seized the throne for her son, the young Edward III. For a brief, dramatic moment, she was effectively ruler of England, but power came with a price, and her enemies would soon turn her triumph into tragedy. Isabella's downfall came quickly. At first, she ruled alongside her lover, Roger Mortimer, but their arrogance and greed angered the nobles. The young Edward III, barely a teenager, eventually turned against his mother. In a daring coup at Nottingham Castle, Edward captured Mortimer and had him executed. Isabella was spared but forced into retirement. Still, her legend as the she-wolf of France endured, a woman who toppled a king and held England in her grasp, if only for a few stormy years. And while Isabella's story sounds like the stuff of medieval drama, she wasn't alone. Across Europe, queens were stepping into power whenever chaos left a void. In Castile, one queen not only defended her throne but reshaped an entire kingdom. She would lead armies, reform laws, and set her realm on a path that would eventually spark the age of exploration. You know her name, Isabella of Castile, but do you know the full story of how she seized power? Isabella wasn't supposed to be queen. Her half-brother Henry IV wanted to marry her off strategically, but she resisted. When Henry died, Castile plunged into a succession crisis. Isabella acted fast, marrying Ferdinand of Aragon in secret, a risky move that turned into a masterstroke. Together, they united their kingdoms, laying the foundation for modern Spain. But make no mistake, Isabella wasn't just Ferdinand's wife. She negotiated, commanded, and fought like an equal partner. Isabella's reign transformed Castile. She reorganized finances, curbed the power of rebellious nobles, and strengthened royal authority. She also made bold and controversial choices, establishing the Spanish Inquisition and sponsoring Christopher Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic. That single decision would alter world history forever. But was Isabella a visionary leader, or a ruthless ruler who placed faith above mercy? Historians still argue, and maybe that's what makes her story so compelling. From Matilda of England to Isabella of Castile, these queens weren't background characters in a man's world, they were the main act. They navigated betrayals, rebellions, and wars, leaving legacies that shaped nations. Some were loved, some were feared, but none were forgotten by the people who lived under their rule. And while history books sometimes brush over their names, their impact is impossible to ignore. Which queen do you think deserves a Hollywood movie of her own? Now here's the thing, these queens weren't exceptions just because they were women. They were exceptions because they mastered the brutal rules of medieval politics. In an age when thrones were claimed with swords, they fought as fiercely as any king. Some through marriage, some through war, others through cunning strategy. They remind us that medieval Europe wasn't only built by armoured men charging into battle. It was also shaped by women wielding crowns, pens, and sometimes poison. And let's be honest, these stories sound like Netflix dramas waiting to happen. Betrayal, invasions, secret marriages, coups, poisoned cups, except it's all real. The Middle Ages weren't quiet centuries of boredom. They were a stage where women could rise to terrifying heights. So why don't we hear more about them? Maybe because their stories challenge the old idea that power always belonged to men. Or maybe because some legacies were too dark for chroniclers to polish. Think about it. Without Matilda, the Plantagenet dynasty might never have ruled England. Without Eleanor, Richard the Lionheart might never have risen to fame. Without Isabella of France, the English monarchy's power might not have shifted. And without Isabella of Castile, Columbus's ships may never have sailed west. Each queen left ripples that still touch our world today. That's not just women's history. That's world history. And it's about time we start giving them the spotlight. So the next time someone says the Middle Ages were a man's world, remember these queens. They fought wars, shaped nations, and bent history to their will. And here's a question to leave you with. Were they remembered less because they were women, or because they were too powerful for comfort? That's the mystery of medieval queenship: power earned, power feared, and power erased.